Hi, Ebony Rose.
Hi, good afternoon. All right, I think we're ready to begin. Zoom's been a little bit of a struggle for me today, so I'm hoping I don't have any difficulties during this meeting because I'm really looking forward to it. So we have a couple important things to do today. One, Susie is joining us because Susie and Darren have done like yeoman's work to be able to digest all of the information we've received both from focus groups, surveys, and some one-on-one calls that actually also happened. And I want to make sure not just since they did the work, but because they know the work the best, that we have some time for them to talk about everything that's happened up to this point, and how we're going to digest that information to get us to some draft recommendations. And I believe we also have Darren. Do we have anyone from the? Because I don't actually know the woman's name. Do we have anyone from the contractor joining us?
Yeah, Keisler. Unfortunately, the lead for that project is ill, so she will not be able to make it.
No.
I'll
Okay.
share some high level points coming out of that, and just update everyone at this meeting. But unfortunately, she can't share. She's not here to share preliminary findings so far.
Okay, no worries. So I was like, wait a minute, we're missing someone. That being said, everything I said about Susie and Darren still stand. We did send to members before the meeting today the report that Susie put together. Is probably also helpful to put that in the chat in case people want to have it in front of them. But I want to make sure we have some time just to go over the findings so far and talk about how we go from findings to draft recommendations. We do have some time. I guess we can talk about this separately second after we do that. But we can also talk about the timing of that as far as the fuller board presentation and board votes. Darren, am I missing anything? No. Okay. Well, I'm going to stop talking and turn it over to people who know more than me, which are Susie and Darren. Darren is on mute. He still knows more than me, but he's definitely on mute.
I'm going to share my screen momentarily, and then I'll have Susie take it away. Let me just, you know what? It's the first one. Okay. So I'm just going to keep it like this so I can just move about and still see my screen. But can everyone see this?
Yes, can I just ask one question, which is, so this looks like it's a report on the survey results. Are we going to talk about the focus groups and what's going to happen there and the engagement?
The focus groups and the survey, the focus groups and the survey results, this is actually a bit of a report on both because the report contains findings from both since it was the same questions. Like the survey was to get quantitative, the focus groups were to get qualitative. So we want to do a download just to make sure everybody's on the same page around the information we got. And then we will shift gears to talk about what does it look like to go from that to recommendations, which also would encompass some of the engagement efforts. So is that helpful, Representative Wattenberg?
Yes, thank you.
No worries, thank you.
All right, can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Okay,
yes.
Great. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to present on some of the from the Education Governance Survey. So just as a reminder that the report itself that you've received is still embargoed from public release until the focus group report by Keisler is released in early September. So we're hoping to publish those in tandem. Quick overview of survey outcomes. We received 1,132 complete responses. The majority of those, 61%, did come from parents / guardians and primary caregivers. And there will be a demographic slide in the next one to quickly, as a quick reminder. And then as far as report contents go, we looked at aggregate responses to 10 questions, including 2 open-ended questions where respondents could fill in details that were not in the listed questions. And then we also have further comparisons by respondent types, which is listed on the slideshow for about 6 of those questions. So as far as demographics go, Darren went over the breakdown of respondent demographics back in the August working session, but I'll reiterate a couple of the key highlights here. So overall, respondents were overwhelmingly white. 54% of respondents identified as white, and they were also overwhelmingly affiliated with DCPS. That was 71% of respondents. Going into the survey process, we had set some demographic specific goals, and the ones that we did not reach will be published in the final report in the appendix. And one member did ask if we could weight our findings based on wards or other demographics, which we didn't do for this report just because of limited staff capacity. And then after demographics, we'll go into some of the key findings that will be a part of the executive summary of the report. And also the report, it will provide demographic comparisons for certain responses disaggregated by these respondent types. But for this presentation, we will just look at the key highlights. Okay, so our first finding has to do with respondents' familiarity with these different agencies. And so respondents report understanding at least somewhat well the roles of DCPS and OSSI the most. But respondents are not as familiar with agencies like the DC Public Charter School Board and the Office of the Student Advocate. I want to make a note here that because the majority of respondents were affiliated with DCPS, that in part may explain the lack of familiarity with PCSB. And then when respondents reach out to agencies for help with education-related issues, they are most likely to turn to the school that they or their child attends. That was 75% of respondents who said they would reach out to them, followed by DCPS and OSSI. And then about 18% of respondents say they would turn to the State Board of Education for help. And I want to note that this key finding here is taken from findings from question 11, which asked respondents for their familiarity with agencies, and then question 15, which is asking respondents who they would reach out to with education issues. The graph on the next slide shows those findings from question 11. So how well do respondents understand or feel they understand the roles of the 7 agencies? I want to note here that SBOE was unintentionally left out of the list of 7 agencies, but based on the graph, it shows that a lot of respondents do not understand OSA and OMB very well. Less than 10% report understanding those agencies well. And then also the lack of familiarity, again, with PCSB has something to do with the majority of respondents belonging to DCPS. All right, our second key finding has to do with identifying decision makers and policy writers. So when respondents were asked who they considered to be the decision makers and also the writers of school policy in the district, OSSI and DCPS were among the top 3 choices that survey respondents chose for both making decisions for schools and for writing policy for schools. About a quarter, slightly more, recognized SBOE as making decisions for schools, and we were ranked 4th amongst the list of 23 choices. And a little less than a third of respondents, 30%, say that SBOE also writes policies for public schools, and we were ranked 3rd in that list of 23 choices. And this key finding is taking results from question 16 and also question 17. All right, and then our key finding number 3, what are the top education priorities for respondents? So based on a list of 18 education issues that respondents could choose from, this graph on the left here is a ranking of those priorities. And so the greatest priority selected by 37% of respondents was program quality in schools, followed by mental health issues, which was selected by 31% of respondents, and then bullying and or violence issues and too many tests came in at 23% of respondents. Based on question 18, which was an open-ended question asking respondents what experiences have you had with schools that should be urgently addressed, the 3 priorities that emerged from those responses were school staff concerns, academic quality, and bullying and school safety. And those were the open-ended responses that Darren and I coded, but they are not reflected in this graph. This graph on the left is just the priorities from the list of 18 issues that respondents could choose from. And with that, I will pass it over to Darren to take us through key findings 4 through 6. Darren, I think you're still muted.
Sorry about that. No, I was thanking you, Susie. That was great. Looking at key finding 4, this focuses on incorporating residents' feedback, and what we found overall, looking at or combining responses from questions 13 and 19, more improvement needs to be made in how the education system incorporates residents' feedback into the decision-making process, and as well as addressing those concerns. In one of the questions, question 13, less than 2% said or perceived the education system regularly incorporates their feedback into the decision-making process. And an overwhelming majority, 91%, indicate that this is done somewhat well to none at all. And then given a list of ways that the education system can improve how decisions are made, the top 2 choices or the areas given like a Likert scale type situation, members who said significant improvements need to be made. The top 2 are being more transparent about why decisions are made. And that was over half, 58% shared significant improvement needs to be made here. And the next item that needs to be significantly improved was making it easy for the public to provide input. And that was a little under half, but 46%. And this next chart shows how this trend, or not this trend, but how these orange bar graphs show where significant improvements are needed based on this Likert scale. The green means no improvements are needed. And so 2% say that no improvement needs to be made on transparency about public decisions or why those are made. And the least popular, or the least, still at 36%, but significant improvements for giving more power to public input. Moving on to key finding 5, information sharing. This is key to making residents feel heard. This for question 20, the top 2 areas that survey respondents felt needed significant improvements. Again, this is sort of a Likert scale. What is needs the least amount of improvement to what needs the most significant improvements. The top 2 were providing a central website with everything they need to know about education and schooling in DC. This item particularly, like a central hub of information for what the different agencies do, where to get that information. This also came up in an open-ended question on how to improve the education system. A lot of people seem to be asking for a central hub of some sort. The second item that had the most, about a third of respondents sharing significant improvements need to be made is for sharing monthly communications and or newsletters with concerns that families and students shared and how they are being addressed. So something like having transparency around if students or family members keep coming up with these issues that need to be addressed, sharing that out with everyone in the community. And this visual, again, shows the Likert scale, 1 being no improvements are needed, and that's in green, all the way to 5 significant improvements are needed, and those are in orange. And the least for significant improvements was opportunities to speak virtually and opportunities to speak in person. And then lastly, key finding 6, improving the education system. This is based on question 21 that asked in an open-ended question, what improvements in general, what improvements need to be made to the education system? Respondents noted the education system in DC needs structural changes to governing bodies and elevating community voices. So looking at a number of different themes that arose from that, 15% shared restructuring education governance and power dynamics. That includes rethinking mayoral control, and a majority of those responses said to either get rid of mayoral control or to lessen it. There were some that said to maintain mayoral control as well, increasing school autonomy, removing bureaucratic redundancies, and so on. 2 was elevating parent, student, and teacher voice in education decision-making. 3 was more equitable funding and resources across schools, and this appeared in different ways in that open-ended question. 4, well-rounded education. So about 6% felt that schools need to have a well-rounded education or access to well-rounded education for all students. And lastly, 5, again, just more transparency in decision-making and how the education system works. So I'm going to turn it back over to Susie.
Yeah, thanks, Darren. So next steps, in early September, the report will be released by Keisler. We can expect both the final education governance survey report and the focus group report to be published in tandem. And right now we're looking at a September 2nd release date. And then in late September, the state board will have its back to school event to share recommendations informed by those 2 reports with constituents. And as a reminder, the report is still embargoed until that report with the focus group is released in early September. Yeah, so I think if there are any other questions that Darren and I can answer, hopefully that was a helpful run through of some of our preliminary findings.
Before you, and I guess this will give people some think time. So 1, Representative Wattenberg, I thought that we were actually presenting on both, but we're not today. So this is to clarify and to answer your question correctly. These results just include the survey because the contractor is not done with the focus group ones, but they will largely be exploring the same themes. And despite the fact that we're getting this overview, even though we sent members of the committee the report, we have not posted the report to Assembly. We're not going to be able to provide it in the chat until the other report is done, because we will release both at the same time. Yeah, so I wanted to clarify that. I see Representative Wattenberg's hand.
Hello. So thanks to everybody who had something to do with this. It's a lot of information and it's very, very interesting. I want to raise one thing. I raised it more generally before we had the survey results, and I raised it in some detail in comments on this. I am very concerned about the fact that the sample is very skewed demographically, that's what happens when you do a survey like this. So that's, but we need to report it in a way that reflects that. So insofar as we have, I really hope that we could find a way to weight it, and I still would push for that. But if not, I think we need to report this out in ways that are credible about the views across the city. So for example, I don't have the exact examples right in front of me, but I think they're my notes. If a majority of the people in the survey said transparency is the #1 issue, but it turns out that that's overwhelmingly Ward 3 and white, which had very disproportionate participation, and that actually Ward 7 and Ward 8, which had, I think, the lowest participation, had very different views about that. When those wards have many more kids in the system, I don't think we can report it without, even in a single sentence as a summary of a question, in a way that isn't reflective of that. I mean, to say that most parents, most respondents think X, as though that's really the highest priority, when it's so skewed, I think it's not credible, and it's not right to do it that way, and that we should report it in a way that, if there's not a lot of discrepancy across wards and race, then that's fine. But if there is, I think we need to say something like, on this priority issue, X% of, the biggest issue for wards X and Y was Z. The biggest issue for wards A and B was X. Black respondents thought this, and white respondents and Asian respondents thought this. I think that's just very important, or else we just present a very wrong impression of what the city says, what the city thinks. So
I hope this is helpful. So 7 and 8 did not necessarily have the lowest responses, but we did not have a representative sample. 2, we cannot statistically weight the survey. We don't have that research capacity in-house. That is actually different. I know enough to know that is different than saying this is literally just counting what ward responses said. So if you notice, and I know the public can't see this because the things are still embargoed, we do say what we can separate out, like disaggregate and separate out and say in Ward 7 or in Ward 8, they tended to rank the top issues as these things. What we cannot do is to statistically weight the results as we run it to actually say, all right, make up for imbalances. Those are actually two different things.
I understand that.
Do you know what I mean? And so we can disaggregate and we can represent, but we don't want to. Yeah. So we can pull out themes from wards, but we can't weight the survey. We just don't have the capacity to do that.
Right. So so 2 things. 1, maybe we should get a consultant to do it, but 2, if we're not going to weight it, then I agree with you. The issue is to report it. And what I'm saying is that on a lot of the questions, on some of the questions, we do disaggregate it. On some of the questions, we don't disaggregate it. And it's not clear what the distinctions are. And as far as I know, maybe on the ones that aren't disaggregated, there's not a lot of big differences. Because I don't have the data. So that's fine too, but then let's say that. But in a few of them, and I think on the priorities, if I'm remembering correctly, there were actually substantially different numbers. And we have that sort of in words, but we don't see the numbers. And the lead is what most people think. Whereas the lead, I think, needs to be what different groups think if that's what's going on in the survey. Is that clear? So I'm just saying, I think we need to be clearer on each of these questions. If it needs to be disaggregated, it needs to be disaggregated, and that needs to be not buried. And if everybody gave a comparable answer, then it's not a big issue.
Well, I'll let Susie and Darren talk about where because I do believe, and they'll correct me if I'm wrong, the places they highlighted were where there were significant differences, where like 7 or 8 or Black or SPED or people said something that was drastically different than the overall response. And I wanted to clarify the difference between disaggregating and weighting, because we are disaggregating and we do have the capacity to disaggregate responses, but we do not have the capacity to weight the survey. We can and we will talk about what it looks like to report out at an external level, which we've not gotten to. And so I don't want to give any impression that we would bury a lead, but we're quite frankly not at a point where we have a lead. And we will have some conversations around how we get from the information we have to recommendations, because this as a pure form, even though we don't have the raw data in front of us, does not necessarily count as recommendations either. I do think it's helpful, again, to disaggregate and to be able to speak to specifically for certain populations where we might want to make recommendations. So I do think that's helpful, but I also want to clarify, just we can't wait. So, and we're not going to have someone waiting it like in real life. There's no more money for this, but we have to be honest about those things.
Yeah, I'm making comments on the draft with the understanding, as you say, that there's going to be subsequent drafts. We're here to talk about the draft. So I'm raising this as a concern in the draft. That's really all I want to say.
Okay, thank you. Other questions? And Darren and Susie, correct me if I'm mistaken about the places where there were huge variances.
No, that all sounded right. And I know I'm going to go a little bit into it in a bit about the focus groups, but the focus groups were oversampled based on ward and other demographics. And so we were able to capture those and that also serves to inform the recommendations coming out of those. But that's another reason why the survey report is still under embargoed and not being shared publicly. We are trying to get this as right as possible.
And then if there's one other thing I could really quickly add, with your question, Representative Wattenberg, about which questions weren't disaggregated, I believe Darren and I disaggregated every question that we could. So we didn't disaggregate the open-ended ones because that would have been very challenging. And we also didn't disaggregate 2 of the questions where there was an error in SurveyMonkey that made it so that they only gave us an aggregate number instead of like, so other than that though, then the 6 questions that we were able to disaggregate have been by the 7 different comparisons that members indicated they wanted to see.
So, and I put this in my notes, so I'll let it mainly stand at that. But for example, well, I can't find it seemed like in some cases there was a discrepancy between what the majority called for and what the disaggregated groups called for. And then the majority led was the lead. That's all so I would just look at that. So that is, not at all misleading. That's all I want to say.
Any other questions? Okay. Thank you, Darren and Susie, as always, because I mean, it was huge amounts of work that went into this. Interim Director Jew. I don't know if that's the accidental hand or not.
It's not an accident.
Uh-oh, it is an echo though.
I'll just talk through Darren's audio. We're in the same room right now.
Okay.
I just would be remiss without also acknowledging that this is Susie's last week with the state board. And so as you are thanking her, Vice President Thompson, I would just like also just to recognize that, you know, today is her penultimate day. Tomorrow will actually be her last day. So thank you, Susie.
Yes, thank you. I don't know if that means you have any closing words for us, Susie.
Well, thank you for the opportunity to just present to you all quickly on this. Darren and I have been working on this for the past month, so it's great to be able to get it to a draft place before I head out. So thank you all.
Awesome, thank you again. All right, we're gonna Representative Wattenberg, is that a legacy hand or is that a new hand?
Oh, no, it's a legacy hand, sorry.
I'm just trying to keep track.
All right.
All right, so that's everything we know and have from the survey. I want us to talk about a bit the timing, like the timing for the following things. One, what it looks like to get recommendations to the board. Two, that's kind of like 1A, what this means for the fall engagement sessions. And 1B, what this means for just like roll out in more general feedback, starting kind of not in that order. For the fall engagement sessions, we have decided September 24th will be the date, as you all know. And most of that was just due to space and logistics, scheduling. We will, of course, have a session on this, and the way we're thinking about it, when I say we, the way Darren and I initially talked about it was we do want to get some feedback from people on the draft recommendations, which implies that we will have recommendations by the 24th. And we want to and our idea is the best way to do that would be to kind of literally blow the recommendations up, make them big, put them on the wall, and walk people through both the framing and the type of feedback we want. Again, we have not decided what the recommendations are, but we will not have a committee meeting before the fall engagement sessions. So we wanted to share our thinking about how to get the feedback. I'm going to dump a little bit more information on you before we have a conversation about all of this together. Two, we of course have a working session and a public meeting coming up. We of course will, now you know the timing for the release of the reports. We and Darren can give a bit of an overview because he actually sat through all the focus groups. As we will then take the reports and essentially work very quickly, mostly online, I think, to get to a place of draft recommendations to put before the board. We will also, unfortunately, we were not able to hear from the vendors today just due to illness. But we will, just like this, we have some top line things that most people said. A similar version of that will happen for the focus groups, which will also allow us to compare and contrast what did the majority of respondents say versus what did the populations we decided most needed to be disaggregated say, and some of the why behind that. Darren, Susie, is there anything that I'm missing before we kind of open it up for conversation? I will acknowledge that's going to be a super tight turnaround because, and we knew this when we decided we needed more capacity and went to an external vendor. It's going to be a very tight turnaround from getting the focus group report to getting draft recommendations and being able to provide them to the rest of the board. So that's everything that I know. But in order for us to have draft recommendations by the fall engagement sessions, is what we're going to have to do.
Are we going to hear a summary today of what happened at the focus group?
Darren can give a bit of an update. We do not have a PowerPoint in the same way because technically
You know, just informal.
yeah.
Yeah.
That's what I was saying. He can do both, but
So to give a
I'm
very
sorry,
broad,
before you do that, Darren,
Mhm.
outside of what happened there, does that make sense? Because all of this happened fairly quickly, and I want to make sure that people understand at least the broad contours of how we get there, and answer any questions around, like, you know, the mechanisms for that or things we should be considering. Of course, knowing that you and I both have not seen the focus group findings. We are all on the same page with that. I'm telling you everything I know.
shall I jump right into?
Okay, hearing
Right.
none, we're gonna go with
Yeah.
it. Thank you, Darren.
Sorry, I'm so excited to talk about it. It is so unfortunate that the first focus group was at the same time of that lightning storm that happened 2 weeks. I'm very, very grateful if you are listening to those focus group participants who went through lightning, rain to get there. Maybe you work for the Postal Service, maybe not, I don't know, but it was just great to see them able to show up. And fully understandable that the other the other participants couldn't make it, but it was great discussions all around, very engaging, and those discussions, the questions that came up were very aligned with the survey, just to make sure that we're getting as broad of an idea of DC residents' experiences and recommended improvements to the education system in DC. So I can't really speak to exactly what they said. I'm going to leave that for the report, but I do want to say that I went to both focus groups, and the questions, everyone had an opportunity to speak and were very engaged with these conversations. They were aligned with the survey questions. For wards, we had for combining both focus groups, we had one from Ward 3, 3 from Ward 4, 1 from Ward 5, 3 from Ward 6, 4 from Ward 7, and 2 from Ward 8. For pre-K 3-4, we had 2 parents for that. Elementary school, we had 4 parents, middle school 4, and high school 6. And so that's just high level demographics for that. For those that we missed for the first focus group due to the lightning storm, the vendor was able to reach out to about 3 of the participants that didn't make it for one-on-one conversations over the phone. Very similar questions to incorporate into the report. We also reached out to, the vendor reached out to 5 Spanish-speaking individuals and also asked them the same questions. They will be coded the same way as the English-speaking participants to incorporate their thoughts as well, or their experiences and recommended improvements to the education system. So we're still the timeline is still set for early September, or late August for a draft for us to review, and early September for the final report. And the survey report would then be shared in tandem with the focus group report. I hope I captured everything in there, but are there any other questions about the focus groups?
Well, I'm just trying to understand how we're going. I mean, do you want us to, as members of the committee, make recommendations, draft recommendations based on the survey, or you want us to wait until after the focus group, and then what is the idea that we'll all make recommendations, people on the staff will, members will, we'll have some drafts. Maybe we present them at the working meeting, get some further input, and then further refine them for discussion at the engagement.
So the idea is to use the feedback from both the surveys and the focus groups to make recommendations. Essentially just like you all received the email that said like, here's the report from the surveys, you will receive a similar briefing. Here is what's in here's what happened at the focus groups. We can also share the raw data if people really want to get into that. I'm not going to recode 1,000 responses, but we can also share that in our board governance folder if that's helpful for members. We will use that to essentially say, and like you kind of are getting a sense of what is it that either the majority of respondents said and or specific groups that we disaggregated, highlighted as most important for us to say, here are some places that we can recommend for improvement. I will say I don't want to be presumptuous given the fact that the focus group participants were intentionally selected because we did not have a representative sample in the survey. So we can talk about if there are things that were particularly interesting to us. The problem with that is we won't have the same, for lack of a weighting capacity, we won't have the same level of input we would have liked from SPED populations, Spanish-speaking populations, 7, 8 Black residents, because it might turn out that some of those things are actually very different. So we will wait for the report. If we need to schedule a subsequent conversation for the committee when the report comes out, we can do that. We can also probably have some of this conversation via email and go through a couple of written drafts of like what we would like to recommend. That would then be provided to the full board. They will give us feedback at the working session, and then we will move from there.
So I'm just really trying to get what is the window between when we're going to get a report and you're going to want draft recommendations? I'm just trying, is it one day? Is it a week? That's what and which days or week?
Well, the end of August is 6 days from now. And so the vendor has until the end of August to provide us with the preliminary draft report. Darren just shared that that's the timeline we're working with and that we're still on track for that. So my expectation is that we will get a similar email within the next week or so, because it might be sooner, but we will get it. That's what our contract specified. We'll get it then. We will then do a similar turnaround saying like, hey, take a look at this and let us know if there are any questions about it or if there's anything we need to clean up. And we can discuss draft recommendations.
So so that window is we'll get a draft report by August 31st and the working meeting is September 7th. So
correct.
Okay, so within that 7 days, we'll review, we'll all make recommendations, we'll comment on recommendations, we'll agree on something, or maybe not agree on something, but bring stuff to the working meeting.
Right, with the acknowledgement that when it goes to the working meeting, it is still it's a first draft. We'll get more input from members. Like we'll do a presentation for members saying like, here's the findings, here's some of the suggested recommendations from the committee. We'll have time where members can have a similar conversation saying like, oh, hey, like, and me ask all the questions about who we talked to, did you talk to this, all the things. People can then give some more feedback. We will present any changes to that at the public meeting. And then we will have something to go out that the board's draft will be able to go out for the fall engagement sessions. at the fall engagement sessions, we will start to get some initial rounds of feedback from the public, and the public can say to us, hey, yeah, you might think we said that, but you didn't think about this, or I really meant that when I was the person who said X, Y, and Z. We can do some of that, which is why we're literally considering taking the actual, whatever the draft, and we'll see how big they get, but literally we want the feedback on that, because for some people, until they see something in front of them, they're not going to engage in the same way. We will do some of that. I am actually anticipating, because we folded our engagement into the fall engagement, that we will probably also need to do a bit of, hey, Ward 7 Ed Council, can we talk to you? Ward 3 people, can we talk to you? Like, we'll have, we can go out, we can do some other rounds of presentations to get more feedback. But then we will provide, we'll use that to provide a follow-up, like some final recommendations. So that's why we had technically it's 2 rounds of feedback for the process. So the first round of feedback ends with these focus groups, which gets us to the draft recommendations. We will then have feedback on the draft recommendations to get us to some final recommendations. Does that make sense? We can also put all of this in an email for members so that they can see it in front of them. But it is in our work plan as well. Anything else? Darren or Susie, have we missed anything? Or Alex, because Alex will tell me too.
I do want to note interest from teachers on their review of the draft recommendations as well as we would have liked in our sampling goals more students, and with the new student advisory committee, maybe charging them with reviewing as well, or sharing that out with students as well.
And Darren, correct me if I'm wrong about this. I think we said that we would note in our report where the places we were off, that we did not meet our representative goals. So like we would know, hey, we didn't talk to as many students as we would like, or we would have liked to hear from, more, I don't know, SPED parents. Clearly I'm making this up. But we're going to note that also.
So I added to that point, I added an Appendix B to that. Actually, I just copied and pasted Susie's work and put it in Appendix B. So again, thank you, Susie. This was really, really great job, if I haven't emphasized enough. But that's in there, both where we didn't meet our goals, as well as the chart that shows our original sampling goals.
Okay. Yeah. All right.
Susie, oh, I'm sorry.
Go ahead. No,
Did
go
you want to
ahead.
add anything to that, Susie?
No, it's under the first 2 sections of the report, under the demographics, there's like a quick overview of those sampling goals and where we fell short. And then, yeah, if you scroll to the bottom, at the Appendix B has the full list. Yeah.
Okay. That's all we know. Yeah. So a lot of work has been done. More work will be coming your way. Again, last call for any questions, concerns, compliments, complaints about what's happened.
One other
Yeah.
thing I'd like to add, sorry about that. I think part of the recommendation, like public reviews of the recommendations or public comments on the recommendations. We'll also work towards gathering the finalized reports and sharing a board having a board governance website on the state board site so that people can actually go back, look at the reports and use those to further help them with the public comment. So I'm working on gathering all the content for that as well.
And we will have, one of the things Darren and I talked about is when we have the engagement sessions, and just like the last ones, like we'll send a draft of like what the slides are and that type of thing. But at reinforcing for people, I guess for some people, it might be introducing all the ways you can make comments to the board, because we do want to both engage people at the focus group session. The fall engagement sessions. We want people to flag for us if there's any groups that they think we should talk to, which is why we want to make very clear where we did not get the people we did not get all the input we would have liked from, and kind of reiterate for people, hey, we have a working session. We have a public comment, like you can provide public comment on this and those types of things, because we know not everybody uses that as a lever to talk to us. But if there are other flags we should give or things we should make sure to reinforce, please let us know, because we do want as much feedback around this as possible. And we want people to take advantage of all the different ways we get feedback as a board, because it makes us better. So that's literally everything we have.
Thank you. And goodbye again, Susie. Your work has been great. Thank you so much. Thanks for all the help.
Good luck with everything moving forward. Thank you.
Susie, you can still talk to us if it's okay, even if you're not our fellow. It doesn't. Hopefully, we will see you. And if there is nothing else for this meeting, we can also let everyone go.
The only other thing I want to say is just also to acknowledge Darren and all his work on this, because I know these are really bears to put together. So I really, really appreciate it. Notwithstanding my concerns that I have raised, but it's a lot of work and I really appreciate it. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, Ruth.
Thank you. We're adjourned. Bye-bye.